The Tyrant's Tomb is the fourth book in the Trials of Apollo series by Rick Riordan. Also, it's a sequel to The Burning Maze. In this video, I'll share my review and thoughts on this book. As always, spoiler warning for this book, and I might reference events from both the Heroes of Olympus and the previous books in this series. So with that, let's get started. I'd rate this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I think that compared to the past 3 books, this one was by far the best one. I enjoyed reading this the most, and I just absolutely loved it. The Burning Maze ended with Apollo and Meg planning to check on Camp Jupiter because of a prophecy and the recent attack the Triumvirate made, and the Tyrant's Tomb opens up to Apollo and Meg in a car. The two of them were quickly attacked by Euronymous. In the chaos of the fight, Apollo and Meg were saved by a person named Lavinia Asimov. And I want to talk about Lavinia for a second. I would say that I didn't really like Lavinia for some reason. I mean, she's not a bad person, but for some reason, I just don't like her. I don't hate her though, but her sort of betrayal to Camp Jupiter pretty hurt me, and I think that's the reason why I don't like her. So, 2 more Euronymous attack, and this time, Hazel Levesque comes in and saves them. A side note, Hazel was so cool in this scene. Like, I just absolutely loved her here. However, one of the Euronymous was able to scratch Apollo's stomach, and that pain lasted throughout this entire book. It was a constant kind of reminder to the reader, since we are in Apollo's perspective, and I just felt bad for him throughout this entire book. It's pretty clear that he is still mourning Jason's death from the previous book, and I think he still is by the Tower of Nero. Like, there was this one scene in that book when Nico asked where Jason was, and Apollo didn't know how to reply, and the next thing he knew, he just cried, which just hurts me every time I read about it. But anyway, Apollo and the rest arrive to Camp Jupiter, and there, Apollo meets Frank and Reyna. The two praetors then learn about Jason's death, and they are visibly devastated by it. Apollo then mentions that, in their following meetings, Reyna looked like she spent the entire night awake and crying, which I think people sort of dismiss sometimes. Reyna's grief is not that mentioned in the fandom, and instead, people are talking about how Piper reacted in the Burning Maze. I understand it though, because unlike Reyna, we visibly see Piper's grief, with Piper literally screaming, and with Reyna, we see her do her crying in private. So, anyway, about Reyna, there's just this weird thing that Apollo felt in this book about her. In all honesty, I didn't understand what he was feeling in the first few chapters. Like, he kept mentioning the fact that Aphrodite told him to stay away from her, but aside from that, I didn't get why he was so awkward around Reyna. So, what was going on? What I finally gathered after finishing this book was that Apollo, how do I explain this? He had a sort of crush on Reyna, which is pretty crazy. I mean, Reyna is as old as Apollo's children, so it feels really weird, I guess. But I didn't think he was that serious. I thought it was just an attraction, and that was it. But there's this chapter in this book that changed my mind completely. To give context, Reyna was talking about how people kept pressuring her to pair up with someone, and suddenly, Apollo says something he should not have. He said, I could, be your boyfriend, as Lester, if you wanted. You and me. Yeah. This just makes me laugh every time I read it, but at the same time, it gives me so much secondhand embarrassment for Apollo. Reyna just stares at him, and for a moment, Apollo literally thought that she was going to kill him. But then, Reyna just bursted out laughing at him. She was laughing hysterically, and Apollo just stood there, not knowing what to say. Finally, she says, that would have been a solid, absolute, hard pass no. And as Lester, I mean, you're sweet and kind of adorkable at times. Apollo cuts her off by saying, adorkable at times? And then Reyna says, but wow, still a big time no. And she proceeds to laugh at him. So, after Frank explains what happened to the attack Commodus made, a couple more events happen in this book until Apollo, Hazel, Lavinia, and Meg go to Tarquin's tomb. Here, we learn the fact that the tyrant in the title was Tarquin, who was the last Roman king before the Romans decided to make the rulers as emperors because of Tarquin's corruption. So after an attack made by Tarquin, which ended with Hazel dropping a wall at Tarquin in order to stop him, they were able to get out of there. After the scene with Reyna laughing at Apollo, they climb to a tower and find Harpocrates, who was the god of silence. It turns out that the connection problem that was happening all around the world was because of Harpocrates. He was disrupting the communication all this time. What made it worse was that Apollo actually bullied Harpocrates as a god, and they're not really at good terms. To be honest, I was pretty annoyed with Apollo here, and I just realized that he did some pretty bad things as a god. Like what he did to Harpocrates and the ravens from earlier, that was just really bad. So after struggling with an angry Harpocrates, the three of them were able to convince not to vaporize Apollo. And then, Harpocrates fades away, and Apollo places his essence in a jar. Just saying though, but that scene was just so sad. And then, they all headed back to Camp Jupiter. Caligula and Commodus were already attacking the place, and Camp Jupiter was pretty weakened up. It all ends to my most favorite scene in this book. Caligula and Commodus comes in the fight, and demands Frank, who was the only praetor left since Reyna was passed out, to surrender the camp. Frank disagrees and challenges the two of them in a duel, which was a single combat to death. And then, I don't agree with what Apollo did here, because it was just way too risky, but he did it anyway. He joins the fight, and Frank tells Apollo to run on Frank's signal. Caligula agrees to fight Frank, and Commodus would fight Apollo. Just saying though, but this fight was so intense, and it ends with Frank setting Caligula and his wooden stick on fire. Right before it though, Frank said, "If I'm going to burn, I might as well burn bright. This is for Jason." The fact that Frank used that quote from the Son of Neptune just gives me chills. When I read that part, I knew that Frank was going to die. That piece of firewood was Frank's life, and when it burns, he dies along with it. It was his burden and curse throughout the Heroes of Olympus series. And then, the inevitable happened. The place exploded along with Frank and Caligula. And I just love the fact that the last thing Caligula heard was the name Jason. That was just payback for what Caligula did. Apollo was blasted into the air, and while recovering, the unimaginable happened. Apollo was filled with so much grief about not just Jason's death, but Frank's death as well. And suddenly, from the explosion, Commodus gets out. Like, he was able to survive it. How is that possible? I have no idea, but he was pretty much alive. At this point, I was starting to hate Commodus, and I couldn't blame Apollo for what he did next. He jumped on Commodus and started to strangle him. I was cheering on Apollo at this, because I could not believe that this jerk just survived an explosion that killed both Frank and Caligula. A side note, the description Rick made was genius. Like, it was just so much foreshadowing of what Apollo did in the past. It said, "We hit the asphalt, my legs straddling his chest, my hands wrapped around his throat as they had been thousands of years before, the first time I killed him. This time, I felt no bittersweet regret, no lingering sense of love." Apollo then let out a scream so loud that it killed Commodus. Commodus was turned into dust, and I had to read that twice, because did Apollo just kill someone with his voice? But anyway, after overcoming his shock and grief for a bit, Apollo walks over to Hazel in order to help. There, Tarquin arrives and congratulates Apollo for defeating the emperors. And then, another fight happens. Hazel fights Tarquin one-on-one, and later into the fight, Diana, or the Roman form of Artemis, comes in and shoots an arrow through Tarquin's head. He was dead in an instant, and the gut wound that was troubling Apollo all throughout this book was finally healed by Diana. For just a quick second, I want to talk about Apollo and Artemis. If you've read the 5 books of PJO, then you'd know what their relationship is like. It's a bit rocky, with them constantly arguing with one another, but in this book, we really see how much Apollo actually cares about her. I mean, we did see it back in the Titan's Curse when Artemis was missing, and Apollo broke ancient laws just to get her back. You know, it's really sweet once you think of it. So after that, the battle was over, and suddenly we see Frank. Frank was alive, which is really surprising, because even Apollo admitted that there was no way that Frank was going to survive that. Then again, the reason why Frank survived was because he faced his destiny. Frank was given the wooden stick since he was a baby, and it's been a burden throughout his life. But at that moment, Frank accepted his fate and changed it. So after a funeral for all the fallen people in the battle, Reyna announces something that shocked me. She said that she wanted to join the Hunters of Artemis. I've stated in my reacting to unpopular opinions video that I'm okay with Reyna joining the Hunters, but I just feel a bit sad because she just embodies the Praetor position and she just stepped down from it. Then again though, I think Reyna's happier with the Hunters, and I think her choice was still a good one. And then, they needed a new female Praetor, and Hazel won the voting. I was so happy for her, and I just feel like she deserves it. Since Hazel was the Centurion of the 5th cohort, Lavinia became the new Centurion, and I was also pretty happy about that. The next day, Apollo and Meg say their goodbyes to the Romans, and they receive the prophecy that told them to find the Tower of Nero, which is the title of the last book in the series. Thus, the book ends. So now, I'll be answering the question, what do I think of Frank's curse? The way Rick handled Frank's curse in this book was pretty shocking to me because I didn't think he was going to go back to it because there's literally no mention of it in the past 3 books of this series. So I sort of forgot about it, and I just thought that Frank would live through the curse forever. Despite that though, I think that Frank's curse being broken was handled pretty well, and I'm just glad that Frank's free to live his life. So how about you? What do you think of Frank's curse? Let me know in the comments down below.